Good evening, everybody. And thank you for joining us at the last session of our Man-Machine Convergence Day. And I want to thank all the guests who've joined us from the Everest Gallery up there. Hi, you're in for a treat from there. Our session now is with, you've all been listening to the music every day, music the whole day, and you've been watching the videos that have been playing during the breaks. And the musician, singer, songwriter who was performing is BT Wolf, who is now with us in person. 1 minute of intro, and then I will hand over to her. So BT does some amazing things using technology and music. She has been nominated for the Best Digital Music Award for this year. I'm rooting for her. I hope you win. She's created music using NFC cards. She has this wonderful musical jacket that she's wearing right now, which has some sensors and some technology in it, which plays the music. She's going to talk more about it. I don't think I will be able to do justice to it. She also does a lot of work on the impact of music on people with dementia. And the most important thing is that after she finishes the session here today, BT and her band are going to be performing live for us at the networking event from 7 p.m. onwards. I think there were instructions given earlier today on where the event is. It's at some place which is 10 minutes walk from here. There are cards. Somebody will tell you where to go. But remember to join for the networking event from 7 onwards. BT, over to you.
Thank you. So I think we're going to watch a very short montage because everyone needs a montage. So this is a 30-second sort of overview of my work. Awesome. So yeah, very enigmatic. I'm going to sort of cover everything that you saw in that video, but I think I have to really start from the beginning. So all of this, for me, began when I was 8, and I first started writing songs. And I saw songs as the sort of perfect way of being able to tell a story and use the real power of lyrics, but then also the amazing emotive power of melody. So suddenly your stories could reach more and more people. And around that time, I also discovered my parents' record collection. And I just thought these vinyls were the best thing I'd ever seen. I was completely obsessed. And the way I saw them back then was almost like a musical book. So something that you could actually open up, you could read the liner notes almost like a story, and the artwork was entirely part of that experience. And then you would put on the vinyl and you would create time for it. You would sit down and listen to it from start to finish, and it would be a real ceremony. Now, fast forward a good number of years, and we're obviously in a very different time for music. But when it came time for my first album release, I really wanted to try and preserve those 3 things that I'd experienced as a kid. That tangibility of being able to hold something, feel something, that sort of sense of storytelling, that an album can actually tell a story, and also the ceremony of really making time for music. So, time for my first album to be released, and I decided to release it as a vinyl, as a lyric book, which was actually launched at the oldest rare booksellers in the world, which was kind of on the other end of the spectrum. But then on the new side, on the flip side, it was released as the world's first 3D interactive album app, which is a bit of a tongue twister. But essentially what that was like having a vinyl for your iPhone. So you had the liner notes, the artwork, really all of the aesthetics that you'd have in a record. But then you could slot your iPhone into this little Japanese device, and suddenly you had a performance in the palm of your hand. And this was 2013, so it was pre-VR, pre-AR, and people just loved it. They loved that sort of focus of bringing the music literally back into the foreground. So the reception for this, GQ did the global premiere. Apple invited me to do this sort of global tour with them, where suddenly, Wired and yeah, I'm trying to think of another thing that's like Wired, and I can't, which is really embarrassing, but good for Wired. Yeah, suddenly I was like speaking at all these tech conferences as a leader in technology, which I found very amusing. But the response to it was really, really encouraging, and I just loved seeing people kind of actually want to sit down with the app and go through it as I intended. So for the next album, Montague Square, I felt like I really wanted to test the limits of tangibility, of storytelling, and of ceremony, but making a release that was kind of really cutting edge and modern. So if we just look here, obviously, like the centerpiece, which is what I'm wearing, the musical jacket, and I'm really going to focus on that story today, because that story kind of, in many ways, really tells the story of many intentions. I wanted to also create something that was like the app, where everyone could experience it, anyone could play with it. It wasn't just a one-off item. So that came in the form of this NFC deck of cards, which was, again, the first in the world. And what it is, I've got them here, is like, it's kind of like having a tape deck, if you remember tape decks. So you've got really all the content that you would have in a cassette. And you then open it up, you have a series of cards. Each card has a microchip, an NFC microchip. And each card is a track off the album. So you've got the lyrics, the artwork printed on the card. You tap it to your phone, and it takes you instantly to the music video, to all that content that you're otherwise missing when you're simply streaming something. And the lovely thing about this is it's entirely dynamic. So you could have one of these at home and constantly be discovering, new material that was appearing. Then on the performance side, I wanted to bring some of that art into the live show as well. So I teamed up with Bell Labs to do the first performance using their Human Digital Orchestra platform. But currently, I feel like I'm sort of sharing a lot of things, probably nothing too deeply, and I really want to tell you a story like from start to finish. So I'm going to focus now on this musical jacket and how it was made, and why it's a musical jacket. It's also rather hard to move in, so I feel a bit like a puppet right now. So earlier last year, I was at this event at the Royal Albert Hall with the tailor who dressed James Bond prior to Tom Ford, and the tailor who also dressed Jagger and Bowie and Hendrix in the 60s, this guy called Mr. Fish. So right here, you're seeing some of Mr. Fish at his best. Basically, if you look at most of like the covers of Bowie's albums, he was in a Mr. Fish. So it was that very like flamboyant, almost androgynous dress style. And this tailor who I was with was telling me that he'd just moved in to the first home of Yoko and Lennon, and would I like to go and visit? So, of course, massive Lennon fan, massive Beatles fan, I was, like, absolutely. So I turn up at this place, 34 Montague Square, and I know that it belonged to Yoko and Lennon, but that's about as far as it goes. So I'm sitting in the front room, waiting for my tea, and I notice this series of black and white pictures on the wall behind me. I'm like, oh, that's Hendrix, just sort of lounging around looking very cool. And that's McCartney with his guitar, and that's Ringo with his drum kit, and that's Yoko and Lennon, most likely naked. And I was taking this all in, and the tailor comes back in, and I say, what is this place? Like, talk me through it. This is, what's gone on here? And he starts to tell me. He says, 50 years ago, this year, Ringo bought this flat, and he was using it very much as his drumming rehearsal room because it was close to Abbey Road. And he then leased it to McCartney, who wrote and recorded Eleanor Rigby in this room that we're sitting in. And McCartney then had his Zapple HQ based out of here. He was recording, William Burroughs, all these other great beat poets. And then Hendrix flies over and needs somewhere to stay. And McCartney says, I'm moving out, you can move in. And Hendrix moves in. And he has this partner whose middle name is Mary. And one night, terrible argument, she runs off, and he writes and records The Wind Cries Mary in this same room. So Hendrix then gets evicted for whitewashing the walls when he's high on acid, which is kind of not surprising. I think this neighbor was delighted to see the back of him. I don't think they got on terribly well. And Hendrix moves out, and Lennon and Yoko move in, and that's their first home together. That's where they do all the early naked campaigning, where they do the Double Virgins cover, and, so it is. So I was sitting there just taking all of this in, thinking, this is insane. This is like one of the rarest places in London, and it's not behind a curtain, and it's not a museum, and I'm just sitting on the couch, and it's been privately owned since that amazing golden era. The Gallaghers had tried to turn it into a recording studio and, failed. So it really was this kind of jewel in London that had been untouched. And immediately as a musician, I'm thinking, okay, how do I record in this magnificent space? But I also felt that there was something more we could do, where we could actually tell the story of this house. We could tell the story of the tailor who dressed all those amazing musicians, and we could turn it into something that both spoke about the past, but was also very much looking towards the future. So I had the beginnings of an idea, and it hadn't quite come together. And then I was at a friend's book launch for a book called Digital Handmade. And I met one artist, an artist called Beatwoven. And she told me that she translated music into fabric. And this behind me is actually the Lucy in the Sky with Diamonds armchair. So quite an esoteric concept to take in. But essentially what it is it's a sort of complex decoding which shows you, a visual waveform, but probably more complex. And suddenly, this idea came together. Okay, so we'll hold a night in 34 Montague Square, and we'll invite, the guys that set up all the sort of early rock magazines, like the founding fathers of rock journalism, and then we'll invite, the new guard into this room that they've been dying to visit. And we'll record the album single live in the room where Eleanor Rigby, The Wind Cries Mary were written. And that live recording with all the resonance and all the ambience and the audience applause would then be translated into a piece of fabric that told the story of that night by this textiles designer and cut by the tailor who dressed Bowie and Hendrix and Jagger into a musical jacket, the first of its kind and the first piece of fashion that the tailor had made since the 70s. So that is what I'm wearing. Here, for example, could be Mark Ellen's riotous applause. This could be the double bass. But essentially, it's that idea of actually turning music into something visual and really bringing the art of music, which has become totally displaced in this era, back into the fore. So I made a joke that when we were making this jacket, I said, you know, the V&A are going to call us up very soon and ask to have the jacket as part of his exhibition. Now, the V&A takes in like 5 new items per year. But lo and behold, we get a call from the V&A, from the curators of the David Bowie exhibition saying, hey, you know, we've got this new thing. It's called You Say You Want a Revolution, and we want you, we want the jacket, we want this whole, you know, magnificent story to be a part of it. So following that, the Getty and the MFA in Boston have all asked to house it at some point. And it's just, for me, it's just so awesomely exciting to sort of see people, I don't know, to spark the imagination and for people to really start thinking about music in the way that they used to. A nice little twist is you can also tap me, and I don't mean that in a sort of crude way, and you can literally hear the song coming from the jacket. So it's funny. I get really excited about the story and the heritage, but everyone always loves a tap. So that's the musical jacket story. I feel like I have no sense of time. So that clock seems to have gone down and then gone up again. But shall I carry on talking, or is it a natural segue? Carry on talking. Stop. Okay. Right. Thank you very much, guys. I really enjoyed telling you that story.
Thank you, BD.
Thank you.
That was amazing. And we are looking forward to the music later in the day. The one thing she didn't tell you is that the NFC cards, which she was describing, apparently she got an opportunity to do a demo of that at the Apple headquarters in Cupertino. And since Apple has disabled the NFC ports in their phones, she is probably the only person who's ever been allowed in there to use a non-Apple phone to do the demo. Samsung, okay, Samsung phone. Thank you. I'm going to do a very quick wrap-up for the day, and then we're on to the party. So I thought we had an excellent day. I learned a lot of new stuff. And we started the day with Gerd Leonard, the futurist, talking about man-machine convergence. There were several things that resonated with me from that session, but you know, mostly it was about singularity is near, technology is upon us. We have a choice to embrace it or to run away. But you know, he also said 90% of what's going on is very good. 10% depends on how people use it. So all that was very, very interesting stuff. And then we moved on to Amber, who and the digital ethics conversation, where they talked about how we should police and regulate and monitor the technology so that it's used mostly for good purposes. And we had John C. Heavens, who talked about data as the new oil. I think in the financial services industry, it's very relevant for us. We've all been reading about it on how data is the new oil, and how most banks use less than 10 to 20% of the data they already own, and how it can be leveraged much more for actionable insights. So that was a good reminder. There was a session in the afternoon on artificial intelligence, and I remember the statement that Eric Rosenblum from Palantir made, which he said, use tools that enable humans to use data and machine learning to make better decisions. I thought it was a good summary of all the stuff that we had heard in the morning. We had lots of very good presentations from the FinTech hubs, so many of them, and the one big takeaway for me was that compared to last year, there is so much more going on in so many FinTech hubs all over the world. And it was also great to hear about examples of these hubs working well with the banks. there were some scary moments. Uh, Gerd talked about how 60% of the jobs will disappear in the next, I don't remember the number, I think he said next 20 years. And while he tried to say maybe most banking jobs will remain, we all know they won't. Some will remain, some won't. And it's a question of figuring out which ones will remain, which ones will not, and how do we train ourselves to be better prepared for the future. We had a session on Think Clash. That was a new word for me. I kept saying things clash yesterday, and I was told it's not things clash. It's like when cars crash, it's called a car crash. So when things clash, it's called a thing clash. Okay. I just want to end with a little story about this man-machine convergence. I mentioned in the morning about all the gadgets I have at home, right? Everything that people talked about. So I have the Amazon Echo, I have the Nest camera, I have the robotics vacuum cleaner, I have the Tesla car, and I was already a little bit worried in the morning. And after we heard Bruce Schneier talk about all the bad things that can happen with the data that's being captured, and he added routers to the list of things I was already worried about, I have to rethink. But my story is about when we got this robotics vacuum cleaner a few months ago, and my Labrador retriever. So we have this cute vacuum cleaner. At a preset time, it gets out of the charging point, goes, cleans the house, and then goes back for charging. We don't have to do anything. So the first few days, our dog was very intrigued. At first, he was scared. He didn't know what this thing was. So every time the vacuum cleaner came near him, he would run away, terrified. After a few days, he tried to play with it. He thought it was another dog. Didn't work. Dog didn't play. And then I noticed a few days later that whenever the vacuum cleaner came near him, he would just stubbornly sit there, not move. And he had figured it out that if he doesn't run away, that thing just turns around and goes away. The sensors work. To me, it was a very good example of dog and machine existing happily in the house. And they do. They're both happy now. And I think it's the same thing that was the theme for the day for all of us, which was, I'm quoting some of the statements from the day: embrace technology, change is inevitable, don't fight it, don't be afraid of technology, be aware of privacy and security issues, be very aware of the vulnerabilities introduced by the devices in your homes, especially for me. And the quote that Gerd ended with: stay happy and stay human. Thank you.